storage account. Here, we can see the account we just created under Recent Resources. Let's click here to jump in. This is the overview page for storage accounts. We provide links to your resource group and your subscription, as well as important details about your account. You can launch the Storage Explorer desktop client if you'd like to manage your account to scale. You can also delete or move your account to a different subscription or resource group. Below, we have a properties section that highlights key settings across the different sub-resources.
Hello there, and thank you very much for joining us in this new Azure Portal how-to video. Today we will learn how to manage a storage account using the Azure Portal, and we have Misha Dar with us today that is going to show us how to do that. With the Azure Portal. So thank you very much for joining us today, Misha.
Thank you so much for having me, Leon. It's so good to be back. In our last video, we actually demoed how to create a storage account in Azure. And so today, we're going to take that same storage account and show you how you can manage the account settings within it.
That sounds fantastic. Let's take a look at how you do it.
Awesome. Let's jump in. So first, we need to find the storage account we wish to manage. If you're looking to find a full list of storage accounts in your subscriptions, Navigate to storage accounts in the portal and choose the desired account. Here, we can see the account we just created under Recent Resources. Let's click here to jump in. This is the overview page for storage accounts. We provide links to your resource group and your subscription, as well as important details about your account, the desired account. Here, we can see the account we just created under Recent Resources. Let's click here to jump in. This is the overview page for storage accounts. We provide links to your resource group and your subscription, as well as important details about your account. You can launch the Storage Explorer desktop client if you'd like to manage your account to scale. You can also delete or move your account to a different subscription or resource group. Below, we have a properties section that highlights key settings across the different sub-resources: blobs, files, queues, and tables, as well as settings that apply to the entire account, like security and networking. Here we can see the state of all these settings, and wherever there's a hyperlink, it means that we can click on said link to modify the setting. You don't need to know where each of these settings sits within the storage account. Just click the link to make the change. So for example, let's change the retention period for blob soft delete from 7 days to 14 days. Just click on this link, and you're navigated to the data protection page, where we change the 7 to a 14, click Save, and we're done. If we go back to the overview page, we can see that the change has been applied. Next, we can click over to the Monitoring tab. Here we present key metrics for the account, like total data ingress and egress. You can scope the charts displayed to either the entire account or a specific sub-resource. Clicking on a chart will give you a full-screen view and additional metrics functionality. We also provide you with some quick links at the bottom of the page to other monitoring and alerting resources within Azure. The Capabilities tab presents key functionality within the storage account. Click on any one of the tiles to learn more and modify the setting or the feature. Let's take a look at security as an example. I click on the tile, and we're on the page where we can opt into Microsoft Defender for storage. We just click a button to enable Defender, and there we go. And if we go back to the Capabilities tab on the Overview page, we can now see that Defender has been configured and is protecting our storage account. On the next tab, we present recommendations for the resource based on Azure Advisor. Since this account is brand new and is following the Azure best practices, there's no action for us today. But if there were potential security, reliability, or other concerns, Azure Advisor would flag them for you here. You can always jump into Azure Advisor for a detailed view across your subscriptions. Moving on, we come to the Tutorials tab. Here we provide quick links to documentation, quick starts, guided tutorials, as well as free training that Microsoft offers to all Azure users. If you need to learn more about how storage accounts work, this is the place to dive in. Lastly, we come to developer tools. Here we provide quick links to client libraries in a couple of different languages. We also have links to key management tools. The Storage Explorer desktop client is the command bar at the top.
I learned a lot he was managing in this video. Next, Misha is going to come back and show us how to manage the contents. Hello there, and thank you very much for joining us today in this new Azure Portal how-to video. Today, we learn how to securely connect to a storage account using private links. And for that, we have Misha Dar, who is going to show us how to do that. So thank you very much for joining us today, Misha.
Thanks for having me, Leon. It's great to be here. Why don't we jump right into it? So today, we're going to show you the new private link center in the Azure portal. And you can find that, if I can type properly, by searching. I, of course, have it pinned because I'm using it a lot. And the good thing about private link is that it allows your resources to communicate with each other along the Microsoft backbone, as opposed to having traffic flowing along the public internet. This keeps your data secure and safe away from prying eyes. So why don't we create a private endpoint so that, in order to build a connection to our service? And so what we're going to do here is fill in some basics. First, our resource group, and a name for our private endpoint. So today, we're going to connect to a resource in our own directory. You can subscription, but that's our subscription set. Specific storage account we're going to connect behind the storage account that we want to act our resource. And so great here because that'll have access to connect to your storage account. And so let me choose my VNet, and the subnet's there by default. And lastly, we need to decide whether we want private DNS integration. For most customers, you'll want to integrate here because this will ensure that your storage account. And so we already have it chosen to yes, and just make sure that we have it within our VNet. And just make sure that we have it within our VNet. Already have it chosen to yes, and just make sure that we have it within. Traffic will flow cleanly. If you'd like, view and create. Settings we.
Right.
All right, so our private endpoint will be a private link connecting the VNet that we just specified to the storage account that we just specified. And all traffic that flows along that will be safe and secure within the Microsoft Azure cloud. And you can still connect to your storage account using the same mechanisms that you do today over the public internet. You can use your REST APIs, you can use SMB, you can use your connection strings. That'll all work the exact same way. It's just that the connection will be as secure as we can make it.
Thank you very much for showing us, Misha.
My pleasure. Microsoft Azure cloud. And you can still connect during our creation time, and looks like everything's okay. Nothing I need to change right now, so why don't we go and create this, Leon?
Let's go for it.
All right, so our private endpoint's being created. Once it's fully deployed, there will be a private link connecting the VNet that we just specified to the storage account that we just specified. And all traffic that flows along that will be safe and secure within the Microsoft Azure cloud. And you can still connect to your storage account using the same mechanisms that you do today over the public internet. You can use your REST APIs, you can use SMB, you can use your connection string. My pleasure.
And thanks every one of you for watching.
Learn how to automatically manage Azure Blob. What tier costs the most and can be accessed. Portal I have a and now I'll select to only apply this rule to blobs. These blobs were last modified to apply to. Go and check it out.
addresses are utilized. So generally speaking, when we are setting up a subnet within Azure, the first 4 addresses of the space are going to be utilized by Azure. And then the very last address space is also going to be utilized by Azure. So even if, let's say, I go ahead and adjust the size of this, even if I say, let's adjust it to 512, 1024, whatever the case may be, Azure will always take 5 of these addresses. So with that in mind, let's say I keep it at /256. If I know that Azure takes 5 of these addresses, how many addresses do I have to utilize within that subnet? If I have 256 as part of the space and Azure takes 5 of those addresses, how many addresses do I actually have to utilize within the subnet? Yep, it is 251. So please always keep that in mind from a planning perspective, in that for whatever subnet you're going to build, Azure will always take 5. Okay, so always make sure that you're doing that, that kind of equation for each of the subnets that you're going to go ahead and build out into Azure. It will always take the first 4, and it'll always take the last address within the space that you go ahead and designate, regardless of the size that you pick up. Now, for some types of resources, they require their own subnet, meaning that Azure would tell you that for certain services such as a VPN gateway, for such services as ExpressRoute, okay? For certain things, they need their own dedicated subnet, which you cannot put any other resources on that subnet. So that's also something that you want to keep in mind as you're going ahead and building that out. Can you rename the subnet from default? Yes. So if you go ahead and hit that little marker icon, if you need to give it a more descriptive name or something more meaningful, you can go ahead and change that information to whatever is going to be the most meaningful for you. And even after you deploy, even after you've gone ahead and deployed this virtual network, if you need to make changes, you have the opportunity to go ahead and do that. Yep, absolutely. So that's something that we want to keep in mind. Azure will always take 5 addresses from your subnets, each subnet, and some services will require that you have your own dedicated subnet to be utilized. Let's take a look here at security. Yes, you can make changes to the IP address starting point if you'd like as well. You have complete control over what that is ultimately going to look like based off of your needs. Okay. So a few things that I wanted to call out here in the security tab. Azure Bastion, which we'll talk more about during our virtual machine session, this gives us a way that if we want people to go ahead and utilize Remote Desktop Protocol or SSH to be able to log into your virtual machines, but to do so with limiting public exposure, we can enable the Azure Bastion service to be able to do that. There is a cost to doing this, and you might, if you want to go ahead and just utilize RDP and SSH in the way that you probably normally have, you can. We're just giving this as an option if you want that ability to be able to, again, have that level of security, because we're not having that public IP address exposure. Okay, but we'll talk more about that tomorrow during virtual machines. Firewall, which used to be part of this course, but we actually has been moved over to the 500. Azure Firewall is a managed firewall as a service. What I mean by that is rather than you managing the upcharge for managing the firewall itself. Azure manages certain aspects of the firewall service for you. So as you're getting bigger, as you're adding more things, the managed service is kind of growing with your particular environment. Okay, so it's offering a little bit more advanced threat intelligence and threat protection than you would get with a network security group or other types of basic security. You will not have the opportunity to use firewall in a lab for this class, unfortunately, because it's a fairly expensive service to utilize. But if you want more information on that, happy to provide it or point you in a direction for the AZ500. Is it a big upcharge? Bastion is charged on an hourly basis. Okay, so let's just get that pricing page up. Okay, so it's not a huge cost, but that being said, it can certainly add up. So again, you want to probably make some planning if that's what you're intending to do. So right now it's saying the basic version of Bastion is about 19 cents per hour. So again, not cost prohibitive, but certainly it's something that could very well add up over time. So something to consider. But again, we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Lastly, DDoS protection. This is helping us for distributed denial of service attacks. So if we are worried about bad actors sending multiple bots that are attempting to take our networks and our services down, this is added protection that we can go ahead and put on our virtual network to be able to provide some advanced protection on our particular accounts. Okay. Again, not things that you necessarily have to enable. Okay, there's other more basic ways that we can apply security, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But if your company kind of requires a little bit more in terms of protection, threat intelligence, being able to do some advanced analytics and monitoring, these may be services that you might want to consider for your creation. So we'll go ahead and review and create. It's going to do its validation. And we see our address spaces and our initial subnet. And it shouldn't take too long for this to go ahead and spin up. Thing about pricing. So this service is the network in and of itself. Creating a network in and of itself is not where you're going to see charges in Azure. Where you start to see charges for networking are if you're deploying things like firewall, if you're deploying things like Bastion, if you have egress, this, that, and the other. Those are things that where you'll start seeing more network related charges. But the deployment of the network in and of itself is not going to be where you see charges for networking. We are actually going to talk a little bit about network security groups as well as application security groups. Those provide some base level of protection for your networks, as well as some other things that we'll talk about through the course of the week that will emphasize more of the security aspect of our networks and our resources. But network security groups are going to be the most easiest and fastest way to put some kind of security protection. Cost more in bandwidth. Exactly. So the creation of the network itself will not be the thing that incurs charges for you. It's when we start getting more of these security features, more egress, bandwidth, things of that nature, that's when we start to see more of that within Azure. So here we have our landing page. It's gone ahead and it's been created. We can see that address space. Okay. It's also telling us, and this will be very important when we have our conversation about intersite connectivity, it's also telling us where there might be some potential overlaps with other networks. So if we are trying to establish some type of communication between network A and network B, we have to be mindful of any types of overlaps that might exist. Otherwise, we will not be able to have communication. Okay, but again, that's going to be more in our intersite connectivity type of conversation. Again, we can make these adjustments to our address ranges as we need to, and we can also add, delete subnets as we need. Again, certain resources will require that there be their own dedicated subnet, VPN gateways, Azure Firewall Service, etc., will have that particular requirement. I'm going to stop here to see, are there any questions that I can answer at this time? Any questions whatsoever? Yeah, so hearing is something, again, we're going to talk about in intersite connectivity. That's what essentially allows us the opportunity to have different Azure virtual networks to be able to talk to one another. Okay, so yeah, so that's going to be the quickest, cheapest way for us to establish communication with our Azure virtual networks. And Tom is going to lead us in a conversation about the different types of peering that's available there. So we'll definitely be hitting that. Great, thank you, John. Any other questions? Any other questions on virtual networks? Okay. So that is just kind of giving us that high-level understanding, high-level overview of, again, some of the things that we have to consider when we are creating these virtual networks. We saw in the portal, the provisioning process, what that particularly looks like. You can create as many virtual networks as you need for your particular usage. We always need to make sure that there is going to be a subscription and a resource group that is going to be attached. Azure will define an address space for you by default. It will also give you a default subnet. However, those are things that you can go ahead and change for your particular purposes as needed. Now, when it comes to subnetting, remember, we can add as many that we think that we need with the available space that we have. We just always need to remember that Azure is going to take 5 of those addresses, the first 4 and the last of that address space. As we had mentioned, certain services are going to require their own subnets, and sometimes they will actually go ahead and do that creation process for you. Okay. Can we move networks between regions? Some of them you have the opportunity to do, but again, you have to kind of think about it from the standpoint of what the impacts are going to be with your particular services. Give me 1 second. Okay, you want to make sure you think that out. You want to make sure you think that out because again, it might have some repercussions. If you get, to the communication, that you're trying to go. Okay, so that documentation goes into a little bit more detail if you do need to make that. But there are some special considerations that you might want to think about if necessary. Yeah. So Wade, again, it's gonna depend. It's gonna depend on the complexity of the complexity of what you have in place so far. That's more of a architectural discussion because we do need to make sure that we understand what is in your environment, what are those dependencies that are in your environment, et cetera, what kind of subscription, all of those different things. So yeah, I'm sorry to give the consulting answer that it depends, but it does depend. But do we have the capability to do it? Yes, we do have the capability to go ahead and do it if necessary. Delete, recreate to fix it. Yeah. So, and these are great questions to, mileage may vary. These are great questions that are more of a architectural perspective. But to your original question, do we have the capability to do it? Yes. Should we do it? It depends. And so that depends on what exactly is going on. Something I do want to call out on this slide. So if you'll notice, in subnet 0, it's saying that there are 250 IP addresses that are available here. What that essentially means is that there is something already in subnet 0 that is taking an IP address. Okay, so it means that Of the 251, there's already something, a virtual machine, some other type of resource that is already taking an IP address. So this is showing you real time what is going to be that available IP, what is available to you as of this, as you're looking at it, as of this writing in that particular subnet. And it will increase or decrease depending on what is happening within your environment. So now we have to kind of talk a little bit about certain types of IP addresses. So when we're talking about anything that needs to obviously hit the public, if we're having something that is internet or public facing, this is where we're making the argument for utilizing public IP addresses. If we have an application that the public needs to use, we're likely going to assign a public IP address. When we're spinning up a virtual machine, we might want the opportunity to go ahead and assign a public IP address to it. However, where there is a premium on security, maybe we just need to direct the flow of traffic for our internal services, such as a VPN gateway or express route. These are situations where we might want to utilize and leverage private IP addresses so that we're not going to be giving ourselves any type of public exposure unnecessarily. So these are, some of the scenarios and situations of where we might want to use one type of IP address versus another type of IP address within Azure. Now, when it comes to our public IP addresses, we have a lot of different features and benefits that are available to us. Now, depending on your organization, if you need to use IPv4, v6, you have that opportunity to utilize one or both of these types of schemes if necessary. If you select both, okay, what essentially is going to happen is that an IPv4 and an IPv6 address will be created. Essentially, two addresses will be created in this particular case. When it comes to SKU, or stop keeping unit, which honestly refers to the different variations of a product or service that's available, you can choose from the basic or the standard SKU. What that essentially means, and let's go ahead and bring this up, it essentially means that depending on the SKU that you pick, there's going to be different types of features available for you to be able to utilize. So if we take a look at this particular, call out right here, it's telling us that, as it probably guessed, if we're utilizing basic IP addresses, we're not going to get all of the features and benefits that we would see from a standard perspective. So for example, talking about security in question, it's automatically going to close inbound traffic by default when we're utilizing a standard, whereas basic IP addresses don't have that capability. When we're talking about things such as availability, okay, making sure that there's some type of resiliency should something happen, or routing preferences. Okay, these are not features that are going to be supported in the basic SKU, but things that are going to be supported in the standard. It is because of these limitations that likely is the case that, this little note that you see here, that as of 2025, as of September 2025, you're not going to be able to go ahead and spin up the basic SKU anymore. Okay, they're going to retire it. So what's going to happen is that if you are using a basic SKU, okay, it's going to give you some pleasant reminder saying, hey, we're not going to support this. You need to go ahead and upgrade this at some point. You do need to do this so that you are in standard with something that's going to be supported in Azure. And Azure will send you love letters and notes to be able to go ahead and do that well before the retirement date is going to happen. Now, for the purposes of the 104, having that basic understanding of the differences is something that you'll want to do, but just remember from a a subject matter expertise perspective, okay, at some point, the basic SKU is going to be retired. It's not something that's going to be available for you to spin up within Azure after a certain point. So just something to keep in mind as you are building up your knowledge of all things Azure. With public IP addresses, we have the opportunity to use either dynamic or static addressing. So dynamic allows us to be able to take one of the first available IP addresses that's there, whereas static, we are giving a fixed IP address for that resource. Can anyone think of instances where we may want to assign a static IP address? What are some devices or resources rather where we might want to have a static resource versus a dynamic IP address? What might be some examples? Okay, DHCP server, web servers, maybe there's some print servers, VPN. Yeah, we might want to have a fixed IP address for those particular purposes, printer, exactly, versus telling them take the first available IP address, okay? So we're giving you those options to make sense of what exactly it is that you might want to utilize one of these types of addressing schemes versus another. We also have the opportunity in terms of that routing. Do you want more of that Microsoft-based internet routing to be able to ensure certain performance standards? Do you want certain internet routing? And part of that is routed in the performance that you expect. The other part of that is routed, in like the cost aspect. Okay, what kind of cost do we think that will be associated should we decide to change the routing preference one versus another? Okay, but overall, we try to give you as much flexibility about your IP addressing, your public IP addressing as needed. Now, in terms of what you can assign these to, okay, virtual machines are usually the usual suspects. We can assign this IP address at the network interface card or NIC level. But when we think about some of our other services, we can also utilize that as well. For example, we talked about VPN gateways, but essentially VPN gateways allow us to be able to communicate securely from an Azure virtual network to your on-premises networks, or maybe to a particular, allowing a device to be able to access your virtual network, et cetera, et cetera. It's one of the simplest ways to set up on-prem connectivity. But thinking about load balancers, okay, when we think about load balancer and application gateway, we can assign those as well. I know that we haven't talked about this just yet. We will talk about it later. But from your understanding or from what you know, what does a load balancer do? What is the function of a load balancer? What is a load balancer trying to do for us? What do load balancers do for us in our network? Yeah, it's a way for us to distribute. It balances the load. I like that, Casper. Yeah, it's helping us to make sure that as we're getting these requests that are coming in, as we're getting these requests that are coming into our resources, the load balancer is going to be able to make sure that the appropriate resources are getting to it, and that no one particular resource, virtual machine, whatever, is going to be inundated in that case. Now, Mitch, you bring up a really great point about scaling. So Tom is going to go over the load balancing options that are available in Azure, or some of the load balancing options. And some of them do speak to what Mitch and Casper are talking about, the scaling and the high availability. Okay, how do we make sure that our applications and workloads are highly available and they are scaling to the changing demand that's coming in? Okay. So we'll talk more about that later this afternoon, but the two chief ones are going to be the load balancer and application gateway. Those are our load balancing options within Azure. As far as private IP addresses, Okay, kind of similar in the same way in that we can apply private IP addresses to our virtual machines, again, at the NIC level. But we can also apply these to the load balancers that we talked about before. Okay, so thinking about load balancer and application gateway. We can also decide, do we want to utilize dynamic or static types of addressing, depending on what our needs are. And again, with dynamic, it's taking the first available unassigned IP address, whereas static, you are giving it a very, very specific